Commander Jinwoo Park had been drinking his morning coffee when the emergency alarm started blaring throughout the UES Retribution. The red lights flashing across the bridge told him this wasn't another drill. He quickly made his way to the communications center, where the massive holographic display was already showing an incoming transmission from deep space. The image that appeared made Jinwoo's blood run cold. A Zephyrian diplomat filled the screen, but this wasn't the calm, collected alien he had met during the peace negotiations last year. This creature's translucent blue skin was pulsing with rapid color changes that Jinwoo recognized as extreme fear signals in their species. The diplomats' forearms were shaking as they spoke into their own communication device. "Please, anyone who can hear this message." The Zephyrian's voice came through the translator with obvious desperation. "The Devourers have taken 3 more star systems in the past week. Billions of lives lost. Our most advanced battleships cannot even get close to them. The radiation storms these creatures create melt our hull plating before we can fire a single shot." The transmission suddenly switched to what looked like battlefield footage. Jinwoo watched in horror as massive creatures, each the size of a small moon, moved through space like living nightmares. They seemed to be part machine and part organic tissue, with tentacles that could wrap around entire planets. Where they passed, star systems simply disappeared, leaving empty black space behind. Lieutenant Minji Kim, who had been monitoring communications all night, looked up from her tactical console with tired eyes. "Commander, this is the 7th distress call we've received in the past 3 hours. The Galactic Council is sending out emergency requests to every member species." She paused, checking her screen again. "Sir, they're specifically asking for volunteers. Most of the other species have already declined the mission." Jinwoo understood why. The data streaming across his screens painted a picture that would terrify any sane military commander. The radiation levels in Devourer territory were so high, they would kill most alien species within minutes. The gravitational anomalies these creatures created could tear apart ships that weren't built to handle extreme conditions. Their weapons seemed to use dark matter itself, something that most civilizations couldn't even detect properly, let alone defend against. But as Jinwoo studied the readings, something else caught his attention. These conditions weren't completely foreign to human experience. Earth's own space was filled with radiation from solar storms. Human ships were built to survive asteroid impacts, electromagnetic pulses, and the kind of harsh environment that made most aliens uncomfortable just thinking about it. The Zephyrian diplomat appeared on screen again, his fear patterns now showing pure panic. "We estimate that any rescue mission has less than a 10% chance of survival. The Council's finest military minds have called this mission impossible. We understand if no one can help us. We just wanted someone to know that we tried to fight back." Jinwoo looked around his bridge at his human crew. They had all been listening to the transmission, and he could see something in their eyes that he recognized. It wasn't fear or hesitation. It was the same look humans had when someone told them something couldn't be done. Lieutenant Minji Kim spoke up again, her voice steady, despite the exhaustion. "Commander, the other species are calling this a suicide mission. The mathematical probability of success is almost 0, according to their calculations." Jinwoo smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. It was the kind of smile that appeared on human faces when they were about to do something incredibly dangerous and probably stupid. He had seen that same smile on the faces of test pilots, deep-sea explorers, and mountain climbers throughout human history. "Send a message to Admiral Dong-Yun immediately," he ordered, his voice carrying across the bridge. "Tell him the Deathworlders are answering the call, and Kim." He turned to look at his communications officer. "Make sure the message includes our current readiness status. I have a feeling we're about to show the galaxy what humans do when everyone else says something is impossible." Admiral Dong-Yun Lee walked slowly across the observation deck of the UES Defiance, his hands clasped behind his back as he watched the incredible sight unfolding outside. Dozens of human warships were moving into formation around Earth's orbit, their massive hulls gleaming under the light of the sun. But these weren't the sleek, beautiful spacecraft that other alien species preferred to build. Human ships looked like they had been through a war before they even left the shipyard. The UES Defiance itself was covered in thick armor plating that had been scarred and dented from countless battles with space debris and asteroid fields. Its angular design made it look more like a flying fortress than an elegant starship. Every surface was covered with weapon systems, shield generators, and backup systems for the backup systems. Dong Yun had always been proud of how human ships looked compared to alien vessels. While the Zephyrians built their ships from delicate, crystal materials that sparkled like jewelry, and the Andromedans preferred smooth, curved hulls that looked like works of art, humans built their ships to survive. They were ugly, brutal, and absolutely indestructible. The communication system crackled to life, and Captain Haijin Choi's voice filled the bridge. She was commanding the destroyer, U.S. Relentless, one of the most feared ships in the human fleet. "Admiral, I just finished talking with the Galactic Council representatives. They wanted me to make sure we fully understand what we're volunteering for." Dong Yun could hear the slight amusement in her voice. Haijin had been fighting alongside him for over 15 years, and they both knew what was coming next. "They've run their computers through every possible scenario," she continued. "Their best mathematical models are showing a 90% casualty rate for this mission. They asked me 3 times if we really understand that 9 out of every 10 ships we send probably won't be coming home." The Admiral looked out at Earth's moon drifting past his viewport and smiled. It was the same moon that humans had been staring at for thousands of years, dreaming of reaching the stars. Now they were about to head into the most dangerous region of space anyone had ever discovered, and they were doing it to save aliens who still thought of them as newcomers to the galaxy. "Did you tell them we understand perfectly?" Dong Yun asked, though he already knew the answer. "Of course, sir. I also mentioned that we're humans, and we specialize in beating impossible odds. I don't think they understood what I meant." Before Dong Yun could respond, Dr. Sun Ho Kong approached from the other side of the bridge. The doctor was carrying a thick stack of mission briefings and data reports, but his expression was more amused than worried. As the fleet's chief medical officer, he had seen plenty of dangerous situations, but this one was apparently entertaining him. "Admiral, I've been monitoring the communications between different alien species about our mission," Dr. Kong said, setting the reports down on a nearby console. "The reactions are quite interesting. Most of them think we've completely lost our minds for volunteering." "What exactly are they saying?" Dong Yun asked, genuinely curious about how other species viewed human decision-making. "Well, the Zephyrians are calling our mission a noble sacrifice for the greater good of the galaxy. They seem to think we're basically committing suicide to buy them time to evacuate their remaining colonies. The Andromedans are studying our fleet composition and trying to figure out if we have some secret weapon they don't know about." Dr. Kong chuckled as he flipped through his reports. "But my favorite response came from the Centauri Republic. Their military analysts spent 6 hours trying to understand our strategy, and finally concluded that humans must have a completely different understanding of physics than the rest of the galaxy." Dong Yun laughed out loud at that. "They haven't seen what we consider normal Tuesday weather on Earth: radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, dark matter weapons. We deal with worse conditions just flying through our own solar system during asteroid season." The truth was that human space was naturally one of the most dangerous regions in the galaxy. Earth's sun threw off radiation storms that would cook most alien species. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter was like a shooting gallery that required incredible skill to navigate. And the outer planets created gravitational fields that could tear apart ships that weren't built tough enough. Other species had evolved in calmer, more predictable star systems. They built their ships for efficiency and beauty, because they rarely had to deal with the kind of harsh conditions that humans considered normal. The moment the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, every alarm system on every ship should have been screaming. The space around them looked like the inside of a furnace that had been struck by lightning. Massive energy storms twisted through the darkness, each one carrying enough power to light up an entire solar system. The very fabric of space seemed to be boiling with radiation that glowed an angry red color. Admiral Dong-Yun Lee stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching the readings pour across his screens. Any other species would have immediately turned around and fled back to hyperspace. The radiation levels alone were high enough to kill most aliens within seconds, even inside their ships. The energy storms moving through the area were so powerful, they were bending light itself, creating weird visual effects that made it hard to tell which direction was which. But the human crew barely seemed to notice. They went about their duties with the calm efficiency of people who had seen this kind of thing before. The only difference was that this time, the conditions were actually worse than anything they had encountered in their home system. Engineering Chief Wanbin Seo was stationed at his console, monitoring dozens of different ship systems simultaneously. His screens showed hull temperatures that would have melted most alien spacecraft like ice cream on a hot day. The radiation counters were clicking so fast they sounded like machine guns. But Wanbin just took a sip of his coffee and made a few minor adjustments to the shield settings. Hull temperature is holding steady at 2000 degrees Celsius, he reported in the same tone someone might use to comment on nice weather. Radiation shielding is operating at optimal levels. The backup power systems are handling the extra load just fine. He paused for a moment, checking another reading. Honestly, this reminds me of that solar storm patrol we did last month near Jupiter. Same kind of energy patterns, just a bit more intense. Navigator Una Park was bent over her charts, using instruments that most alien species couldn't even understand, to plot a course through what looked like complete chaos. The gravitational anomalies in this region were so severe they were actually twisting space and time into impossible shapes. Her computer screens showed three-dimensional maps that looked more like abstract art than navigation charts. The gravitational fields here are incredible, she said, her voice filled with professional admiration rather than fear. These anomalies are bending space-time so severely that normal physics barely apply. But I think I understand what's happening now. She looked up from her calculations with a slight smile. The Devourers aren't just hiding in these conditions by accident. They're using them as camouflage. If you can't survive the environment, you can never get close enough to hunt them. Captain Minho Jung moved between the different stations on his bridge, checking on his crew and monitoring their progress. These were people he had served with for years, and he knew exactly how they would react to dangerous conditions. What impressed him wasn't their skill, though they were certainly skilled. What impressed him was how completely normal this all seemed to them. His weapons officer was calmly testing the targeting systems, while energy storms raged outside that could have destroyed entire cities. His communications specialist was trying to establish contact with other ships in the fleet while electromagnetic interference scrambled every frequency. His medical officer was preparing for casualties while radiation levels climbed higher and higher. The other ships in the fleet are reporting ready status, his communications officer announced. The UES Relentless says their weapon systems are fully charged. The UES Vengeance reports that their fighters are prepared for launch. Captain Minho looked out at the hellscape surrounding them and felt something that other species might have found disturbing. He felt at home. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans specialized in. While aliens built their ships for peaceful exploration and elegant efficiency, humans built theirs for survival in the most hostile environments imaginable. All ships, this is Captain Jung, he announced over the fleet communication system. Set course for the Devourer fleet. Our long-range sensors are picking up their signatures about 6 hours ahead through the storm systems. He paused, looking around at his crew one more time. Time to show these creatures what Deathworlders do best. Let's remind them why humans earned that reputation in the first place. The human fleet began moving deeper into the maelstrom, their ugly, brutal ships cutting through conditions that would have been instantly fatal to any other species in the galaxy. The first warning came from the long-range sensors. When they were still 20 minutes away from visual contact, Lieutenant Jisoo Han, who was monitoring the detection equipment, suddenly sat up straighter in her chair and started adjusting her instruments with quick, nervous movements. "Captain, I'm picking up something massive on the edge of our sensor range," she called out across the bridge. "The readings don't match anything in our database. It's huge, sir, bigger than anything we've ever encountered." Captain Tae-young-an moved over to look at her screen, and what he saw there made him pause. The sensor reading showed an object that was easily the size of a small space station, but it wasn't built like any space station he had ever seen. The computer was having trouble even classifying what it was detecting. "Is it artificial or organic?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "That's the problem, sir. It appears to be both. Like someone took living tissue and fused it with advanced technology. The energy readings are off the charts." When the creature finally came into visual range, the entire bridge fell silent. The main screen showed something that looked like it had crawled out of humanity's worst nightmares. It was a massive, writhing mass of what appeared to be living flesh, but flesh that had been twisted and combined with metal and energy systems in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Tentacles, the size of city blocks, moved slowly through space, each one covered with organic armor that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Weapon systems that looked more grown than built dotted its surface, and the whole thing radiated an aura of menace that was almost tangible. "My God," whispered Navigator Kuyan Shin from his station. "No wonder the other species couldn't fight these things. How do you kill something that looks like it's already dead?" The answer came immediately. Without any warning, the creature opened fire with energy beams that lit up space like miniature suns. The beams were so powerful that they actually distorted the view on the main screen, and the computer systems started issuing warnings about radiation exposure. But weapons. Officer Cha-young Lim didn't even flinch. She had been tracking the creature's movements since it appeared, and her fingers were already dancing across the weapon control systems. Her plasma cannons responded instantly, sending streams of superheated energy directly toward the creature's center mass. "Fascinating," she said in a voice that was completely calm despite the fact that they were under attack by something that could destroy planets. "This thing has almost identical attack patterns to a Terran giant squid. It uses overwhelming force to stun its prey, then moves in for the kill while they're paralyzed." Her shots found their target, punching through the creature's organic armor and causing it to writhe in what might have been pain. Dark fluid began leaking from the wounds, and the creature's energy beams became less focused. "The armor is tough, but it's not invincible," Cha-young continued, adjusting her targeting systems. "It's protecting vital organs underneath, just like any Earth predator. We just need to find the weak spots." Captain Tae-young watched the tactical display as more contacts began appearing on their sensors. One devourer was bad enough, but now they were facing an entire pack of the creatures. Each one was easily large enough to destroy a human city, and they were all moving toward the human fleet with obvious hostile intent. But instead of fear, he felt something else. These creatures were operating on instinct, using the same tactics they had probably used for thousands of years against helpless prey. They expected their enemies to panic and flee, leaving them free to hunt and destroy at will. "They're expecting us to run like every other species they've encountered," he said, watching the way the creatures moved. "Poor things don't realize they're dealing with persistence hunters." Communications specialist Jimin Park looked up from his station with an expression of amazement. "Captain, I'm monitoring their bioelectrical patterns through our sensors. They're broadcasting confusion signals. I don't think they understand why we're not running away. The truth was that these creatures had never faced an enemy that fought back effectively. For generations, they had terrorized species that were built for peace and exploration. Their usual prey would take one look at them, panic, and either flee or freeze in terror. But humans were different. Humans were the descendants of creatures that had hunted woolly mammoths with nothing but pointed sticks. They were the species that had looked at the most dangerous predators on Earth and decided to make them into pets. They didn't run from monsters. They studied them, learned their weaknesses, and then figured out how to beat them. The human fleet began moving into attack formation with the cold efficiency that had made humanity the apex predator on their home planet. Each ship knew its role, each captain understood the plan, and each crew member was ready to do whatever it took to bring down prey that was vastly larger and more powerful than they were. After 3 days of constant fighting in the nightmare conditions of Devourer space, something remarkable had happened to the human fleet. What had started as desperate survival had transformed into something much more organized and deadly. The humans weren't just fighting anymore, they were hunting. Commander Seojin Kim piloted his fighter squadron through a massive debris field, left over from a destroyed planet. The twisted metal and rock formations provided perfect cover as his small, fast ships moved like a pack of wolves stalking their prey. Behind the debris, a devourer the size of a small moon was trying to escape from the trap the humans had set for it. Red Squadron, move to position Alpha. Seojin's voice crackled over the communication system as he guided his fighters in a wide arc around the creature. Blue Squadron, take position Beta. We're going to drive this thing exactly where we want it to go. The massive biomechanical creature was powerful enough to destroy entire cities with a single energy blast. But it was also predictable. Like most predators, it followed patterns that humans had learned to recognize over thousands of years of hunting on Earth. Just like driving buffalo off a cliff, Seojin remarked to his squadron as they began their coordinated attack. His fighters moved in perfect formation, each one firing just enough to annoy the creature and make it turn in the direction they wanted. These things are incredibly powerful, but they're also completely predictable once you understand how they think. The Devourer, frustrated by the small ships buzzing around it like angry insects, began moving exactly where the humans wanted it to go. It was heading directly toward the waiting guns of the UES Vengeance, one of humanity's most heavily armed battleships. Dr. Gaeong Shin watched the entire operation unfold from her mobile laboratory, a specially shielded research vessel that could operate in the extreme conditions of Devourer space. Her screens were filled with data about the creature's behavior patterns, biological functions, and tactical responses. What she was seeing fascinated her as a scientist, even as it horrified her as a human being. Admiral, I've been studying their combat behavior for 3 straight days now, she reported over the fleet communication system. These creatures are operating on pure instinct. Attack, consume, reproduce. That's literally all they know how to do. They've never had to develop complex tactical thinking, because nothing in their entire evolutionary history has ever survived long enough to require it. She pulled up a series of charts showing the creature's attack patterns. Every single engagement follows the same basic structure. They use overwhelming force to stun their prey, then move in for consumption while the target is paralyzed by fear or damage. It's worked for them for thousands of years because every other species they've encountered has fit into that pattern. Fleet Tactician Jun Ho Yoon was coordinating the overall strategy from the command ship, using 3-dimensional displays to track every human vessel and every devourer in the battle zone. His job was to think several moves ahead, anticipating what the creatures would do and positioning human forces to take advantage of it. The psychological impact is already becoming obvious, he reported to Admiral Dong Yoon during their daily strategy briefing. We're teaching these creatures something. completely knew that their prey can be more dangerous than they are. Look at these movement patterns from yesterday compared to day 1. He highlighted several areas on his tactical display where devourer behavior had changed dramatically. On the first day, they attacked our ships with complete confidence. They expected us to panic and flee like every other species they've ever encountered. But now look at this data from today's engagements. The patterns were unmistakable. The devourers were hesitating before attacking. They were positioning themselves more defensively. Most significantly, they were starting to retreat when human forces concentrated against them, something that had never been observed in their behavior before, for the first time in their existence. These creatures are experiencing something they've never felt before, Junho continued. Fear. They're beginning to understand that we're not prey, we're competitors, and that realization is changing everything about how they fight. The proof came during the afternoon engagement, when a pack of 5 devourers encountered a single human destroyer. In the past, such a scenario would have been a quick slaughter, with the creature overwhelming the smaller ship through brute force. Instead, the devourers circled the human vessel cautiously, testing its defenses and looking for weakness. When the destroyer began broadcasting targeting data to other human ships in the area, the devourers did something unprecedented in their species history. They retreated from battle, disappearing back into the radiation storms, rather than risk a fight they might not win. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. By the 4th day of fighting, the human fleet had learned enough about their enemy to begin what military historians would later call one of the most brutal counterattacks in galactic history. The devourers had made a critical mistake. They had given humanity time to study them, adapt to their tactics, and develop strategies that would have been unthinkable to any other species. The battle that changed everything began when a pack of 7 devourers surrounded the human destroyer, U.S. Courage, during what should have been a routine patrol mission. The ship, commanded by Captain Deono, had been operating alone when the creatures emerged from a radiation storm like predators, ambushing prey. Captain Ho found herself facing impossible odds. Her ship was powerful, but 7 devourers working together could overwhelm any single human vessel. The creatures moved in to finish her off, probably expecting the same quick victory they had achieved against countless other species throughout their history. But Captain O had something the devourers didn't understand. She had the human refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed certain. All hands, this is the captain. Her voice echoed through the ship's communication system as enemy energy beams tore chunks out of her hull. Prepare for emergency evacuation procedures. We're going to show these things what happens when they corner a human. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for generations. Instead of trying to escape or surrendering to superior numbers, Captain O deliberately flew her damaged ship directly into the center of the Devourer formation. Her reactor, already critical from battle damage, was pushed beyond all safety limits. The explosion that followed lit up space for thousands of kilometers. The UES Courage disappeared in a ball of nuclear fire that consumed not just 1 devourer, but 3 of them. The remaining creatures, which had never experienced anything like this in their entire existence, fled in complete panic. Admiral Dong-Yun watched the explosion from the bridge of his command ship, his expression grim but respectful. Death tactics at their finest, he said quietly to his staff officers. We don't just fight to win battles, we fight to ensure the enemy learns to fear us. Captain O just taught them a lesson they'll never forget. The psychological impact of that single action rippled through the entire devourer population. These creatures had terrorized the galaxy for centuries by using overwhelming force against helpless prey. The idea that their victims might willingly destroy themselves to inflict damage was completely outside their understanding. Lieutenant Jisoo Beek, who had been coordinating fighter operations throughout the campaign, began implementing similar tactics with damaged ships that could no longer fight effectively. Pilots whose fighters had taken critical damage were given a choice. They could eject and be rescued by other human ships, or they could stay with their fighters and turn them into guided missiles. The beautiful thing about this strategy, she explained during a briefing with other squadron leaders, is that the Devourers are learning that even our defeats are victories. When they damage one of our ships, instead of getting an easy kill, they get a bomb flying at their face. The tactic worked because it played on something fundamental about human psychology that other species found difficult to understand. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, creatures that would pursue their prey for days or weeks until it collapsed from exhaustion. The concept of giving up simply wasn't part of their basic programming. Over the following days, the Devourers began showing behavior patterns that no xenobiologist had ever recorded. Creatures that had previously attacked with mindless aggression now approached human ships with obvious caution. They began positioning themselves defensively, looking for escape routes before engaging in combat. Most significantly, they started retreating from battles they could have won when faced with human ships that were clearly damaged or outnumbered. The Devourers would hesitate, apparently calculating whether the victory would be worth the cost. Dr. Hound Kim, the fleet's xenobiologist, was fascinated by the behavioral changes she was observing. These creatures have spent their entire evolutionary history as apex predators, she reported to Admiral Dong-Yoon. They've never encountered prey that fought back effectively, much less prey that would sacrifice itself to inflict damage. We're literally rewriting their understanding of how combat works. The tide of battle had turned completely. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were experiencing something their species had never felt before: fear of their prey. Dr. Haniel, you had been working for 6 straight days in conditions that would have terrified most scientists in the galaxy. Her mobile laboratory was essentially a heavily armored pod that could be deployed in active combat zones, allowing her to study the enemy while battles raged around her. The constant sound of weapons, fire, and the violent shaking from nearby explosions had become background noise to her focused work. She had been analyzing tissue samples and energy readings from destroyed Devourer ships when something in the data caught her attention. At first, she thought her instruments were malfunctioning because the readings didn't match what she expected from a species of mindless destroyers. This can't be right, she muttered to herself, running the analysis for the 3rd time. The biosignatures she was seeing told a story that was completely different from what everyone assumed about these creatures. Her laboratory shook violently as another explosion went off nearby, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the incredible discovery she had just made. The Devourers weren't the unstoppable killing machines that everyone thought they were. They were something much more tragic. Admiral Dong-Yoon, I need to speak with you immediately, she called over the communication system. I've found something that changes everything we thought we knew about these creatures. When the Admiral's image appeared on her screen, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He had been coordinating battles non-stop for almost a week, and the stress was showing on his face. What do you have for me, Doctor? He asked. Please tell me it's good news. We could use some right about now. Sir, these aren't just mindless destroyers, she said, pulling up her analysis on the shared screen. Look at these bio-readings. The metabolic rates are all wrong for a healthy species. Their cellular structure shows signs of severe malnutrition. They're starving, Admiral. They're consuming everything because they're dying out. The implications of what she was saying hit him immediately. Are you telling me their natural food sources are extinct? That's exactly what I'm telling you, she replied, highlighting specific data points. These creatures evolved to feed on a specific type of energy that used to be abundant in this region of space. But something happened, maybe a natural disaster. Maybe they overconsumed their resources, and now that energy source is gone. They're eating planets and star systems because they're desperate to survive. While Dr. Yu was making her groundbreaking discovery, Communications Officer Young-Ji Choi was conducting her own experiments on the other side of the fleet. She had been trying for days to establish some form of communication with captured devourer specimens that human forces had managed to subdue without killing. The breakthrough came when she stopped trying to use language and started using pure mathematics. She began broadcasting simple mathematical concepts, basic addition, geometric shapes, prime numbers, hoping to find some common ground with these alien minds. The response, when it finally came, shocked her completely. The devourers weren't just intelligent. They were desperately trying to communicate. Their bioelectrical patterns showed complex emotional states that included what could only be described as grief, fear, and hopelessness. "Admiral, I've managed to establish basic communication with the specimens," Youngji reported during the next briefing. "They're not evil, sir. They're desperate. Their entire species is facing extinction, and they know it." Through careful mathematical exchanges, she had learned that the devourers had once been a peaceful species that fed on naturally occurring energy fields in deep space. They had lived in harmony with their environment for thousands of years. But gradually, their food sources had begun disappearing, possibly due to natural stellar evolution or cosmic changes they couldn't control. Faced with starvation, they had been forced to find alternative energy sources. The organic matter and stellar energy found in planetary systems could sustain them temporarily. But it was like trying to survive on junk food. It kept them alive, but slowly poisoned them. "They know what they're doing is wrong," Youngji continued, her voice heavy with emotion. "But they're watching their children die, and they don't know any other way to survive." This revelation hit Admiral Dong-Yun like a physical blow. For a week, his forces had been fighting what they thought was an invasion by mindless monsters. Now he was learning that they were actually dealing with refugees, an entire species, fleeing extinction and trying desperately to find a way to survive. The military situation was clear. Human forces were winning the war through superior tactics and their willingness to fight in impossible conditions. They could continue the battle and eventually wipe out the devourers completely. It would be a clear victory for humanity and the Galactic Council. But the moral situation was completely different. These weren't evil conquerors trying to build an empire. They were parents watching their children starve, doing terrible things because they couldn't find any alternative. "Get me a direct line to the Galactic Council," Admiral Dong-Yun ordered, his mind already working on possibilities that his staff would probably consider insane. "We're going to try something that might be completely crazy, even by human standards." When Admiral Dong-Yun announced his plan to the fleet commanders, the initial reaction was complete silence. Even by human standards, what he was proposing seemed impossible. They were going to continue fighting the adult devourers, while simultaneously trying to rescue their young. It was the kind of operation that would have been rejected as fantasy by any other species in the galaxy. Captain Nari Hong was chosen to lead the rescue operation because of her experience with dangerous extraction missions. She had spent years rescuing human colonists from disaster zones, but this was something entirely different. She would be leading her ships into active combat zones to save the children of the very creatures they were fighting. "I need volunteers only," she announced to her crew during the mission briefing. "What we're about to attempt has never been tried before in galactic history. We're going to fight the parents while trying to save their children. I won't lie to you, the chances of survival are not good." Every single member of her crew volunteered. The first rescue mission took place during one of the largest battles of the entire conflict. Human destroyers were engaged in fierce combat with a pack of adult devourers when long-range sensors detected something unprecedented: a nursery ship hiding behind a destroyed planet, filled with juvenile devourers, too young to fight. Captain Nari led her rescue fleet directly through the middle of the battle zone. Energy beams from both human and devourer weapons lit up space around them as they approached the nursery ship. The adult devourers, seeing human vessels approaching their young, went into a frenzy of protective rage that made them even more dangerous than usual. "This is insane," muttered Lieutenant Soo-Yoon Park from his position at the weapons console. "We're literally flying through a war zone to rescue enemy children while their parents are trying to kill us." "Welcome to human logic," Captain Nari replied calmly, maneuvering her ship between energy blasts that could have vaporized them instantly. "We specialize in doing things that shouldn't be possible." The nursery ship itself was unlike anything in human experience. It was clearly organic, grown rather than built, with a hull that pulsed like living tissue. Inside, according to their sensors, were hundreds of juvenile devourers in various stages of development. Some were barely larger than human children, while others were already the size of fighter craft, but still, clearly young. Dr. Kibium Lee had been working around the clock to develop communication protocols that might convince the adult devourers to allow the rescue. Using the mathematical language that Communications Officer Youngji had established, he began broadcasting messages that combined mathematical concepts with chemical signals that indicated peaceful intentions. "The adult creatures understand that. We're trying to help," he reported during one of the rescue operations. "Their higher brain functions recognize that we're not threatening their young, but their protective instincts are screaming at them to attack anything that gets near their children. It's like trying to approach a mother bear's cub's logic. Doesn't matter when parental instincts take over." The breakthrough came when Dr. Lee realized that the devourers used chemical communication, similar to some Earth species, by broadcasting chemical signals that indicated no threat to offspring combined with mathematical proof that the human ships were equipped for life support rather than combat. He managed to negotiate temporary ceasefires around the nursery ships. The galaxy watched in complete amazement as human rescue ships moved through active combat zones, carefully extracting young devourers while battles raged around them. Alien observers from dozens of species monitored the operation, trying to understand how humanity could be simultaneously fighting and saving the same enemy. "They're the most dangerous species we've ever encountered," reported a Zephyrian military analyst to the Galactic Council. "Their combat effectiveness in impossible conditions is beyond anything we thought possible. But they're also the most compassionate. They're risking their lives to save the children of creatures that are trying to kill them." The rescue operations continued for weeks, with human ships darting in and out of combat zones to evacuate young devourers. Each rescue mission was incredibly dangerous, requiring perfect timing and coordination between combat units and rescue vessels. Captain Nari found herself thinking about the impossible contradiction of what they were doing during one particularly difficult mission. "We're fighting the parents with everything we've got," she remarked to her crew as they loaded another group of juvenile devourers into their specially modified cargo holds. "But we're treating their children like they were our own. Only humans would attempt something this crazy and somehow make it work." The young devourers, once rescued, showed remarkable intelligence and curiosity about their human rescuers. They seemed to understand that the strange bipedal creatures were helping them, even though they looked nothing like their own species. By the end of the rescue operations, humanity had saved over 10,000 young devourers from the war zone, demonstrating to the entire galaxy that they were capable of showing mercy even to their enemies' children. 6 months had passed since the last shots were fired in what historians were already calling the Devourer Crisis. Admiral Dong-Yoon Lee stood quietly on the observation deck of the EU's Harmony, a specially constructed research vessel that had been built to monitor the most successful rescue operation in galactic history. Through the reinforced viewing windows, he could see something that still amazed him every time he looked at it. The Cygnus Nebula, which had once been nothing but empty space and cosmic dust, was now teeming with life. Young devourers, no longer the terrifying creatures of nightmare that had consumed entire star systems, swam peacefully through clouds of energy-rich gas that provided all the nutrition they needed. The adult devourers had undergone an incredible transformation once they were no longer starving. Without the desperate hunger that had driven them to consume everything in their path, they had reverted to what Dr. Haniel you believed was their natural behavior. They were curious, intelligent creatures that showed remarkable gentleness with their young and even seemed interested in the human ships that visited their new home. It's hard to believe these are the same creatures that we were fighting just 6 months ago, said Captain Kung Min Cho, who was commanding the monitoring mission. Look at them. They're playing. I've never seen anything like it. Indeed, the young devourers appeared to be engaging in what could only be described as games. They chased each other through the nebula clouds, performed elaborate maneuvers that served no obvious purpose except entertainment, and even seemed to be communicating with the human observers through patterns of bioluminescent flashes. Ambassador Yongji Park approached Admiral Dong Yun with a datapad containing the latest reports from the Galactic Council. As humanity's chief diplomatic representative, she had been fielding questions and requests from alien species for months, trying to explain what humans had accomplished. The Council is still trying to understand exactly what we did here, she reported, shaking her head with a slight smile. Most of the alien species are calling it Deathworlder diplomacy, the ability to fight something to a complete standstill and then turn around and save it. They're having trouble finding anything similar in their own histories. Admiral Dong Yun nodded, understanding their confusion. Most species in the galaxy approached problems in very straightforward ways. If something was a threat, you either fled from it or destroyed it. The concept of fighting an enemy while simultaneously trying to save them was uniquely human. The Zephyrians have been particularly interested in our methods, Ambassador Youngji continued. They're the ones who first called for help, and they've been studying our entire approach to the crisis. Their military analysts are completely baffled by our tactics. Dr. Sang Yuno joined them on the observation deck, carrying his daily monitoring reports about the devourer population. As the chief xenobiologist assigned to the project, he had been tracking the creatures' adaptation to their new environment with the dedication of a proud parent watching his children grow up. The population growth has exceeded all our projections, he announced with obvious satisfaction. The young ones are developing faster than we expected, and the adults are showing signs of returning to their original reproductive cycles. At this rate, they'll be completely self-sustaining within 2 generations. He pulled up holographic displays showing population charts, genetic diversity analyses, and behavioral studies. We didn't just save a species from extinction. We gave them a future. Their culture, their knowledge, their entire way of life. None of that would have existed if we had simply destroyed them. The success of the Devourer rescue had created unexpected consequences throughout the galaxy. Word of humanity's unique approach to impossible problems had spread to every inhabited system, and the results were overwhelming. Sir, we're receiving our 15th request for assistance this week, reported Communications Officer Jiwan Kang from the ship's communications center. This one is from the Andromedans. They're dealing with a situation involving sentient plasma storms that are threatening their colony worlds. Admiral Dong Yun looked at the request with interest. Sentient plasma storms were definitely a new one, even by human standards. What about the others? The Regellians want help with a space-time anomaly that's aging their star system too quickly. The Centauri Republic is asking for assistance with what they describe as aggressive geometric entities that are converting their space stations into mathematical equations. And the Vegan Confederation needs help with something they're calling carnivorous dark matter. Each request represented a problem that other species had deemed impossible to solve. They weren't asking for humanity's military might to win wars. They were asking for the human ability to look at impossible situations and somehow find solutions that nobody else could imagine. As Admiral Dong Yun prepared to leave the observation deck, he took one last look at the thriving devourer community in the nebula. Young creatures that could have grown up to terrorize the galaxy were instead learning to live in harmony with their environment and their neighbors. Set course for the Andorian system, he ordered. Apparently, they have a situation involving sentient plasma storms that requires our particular brand of insanity. The Deathworlder fleet prepared for another impossible mission, ready to prove that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their capacity for destruction, but their refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible.